Hi everyone, I'm Annalisa from C.A.C. Global Solutions. Welcome to episode 2 of Storytime with Bret. For those of you who haven't seen episode 1, these are short stories about experiences that Bret had as an aircraft maintenance engineer and a airworthiness surveyor. So I look forward to the story of today. So what do you have for us?
Today, my story is about pre-purchase inspections. We can go on about many topics on pre-purchase inspections. We can do a podcast just on that quite easily. I'm sure there's so many things that came to mind as I was thinking about this story. But this story in particular was about a Bombardier product, a Challenger 600, actually Challenger 601, that we were selling, the company I was working for was selling. And it was input for a pre-purchase inspection at a maintenance facility. And one of the important things to remember about pre-purchase inspections is that you have to understand the scope of the pre-purchase inspection. It's very specific. It's usually expressed in writing in detail as to how far the inspection will go. I mean, the owner would like to tear everything apart and look at every last little piece. And the seller would like you to just look at it from 30 feet away and say, hey, it looks nice, let's get that. But that's not how it works, right? So generally, pre-purchase inspections are spelled out in writing. And this one was no different. It was spelled out in writing as well. And you know, with pre-purchase inspections, typically there are 3 parties involved. There's the seller, the purchaser, and the maintenance organization or the person that's performing the pre-purchase inspection. So, excuse me. The terms of the pre-purchase inspection are actually very important, and this story will explain why. So, another aspect that I'd like to just touch on as well is the importance of having representatives both from the purchaser's perspective and the seller's perspective on site during the pre-purchase inspection. It can avoid a lot of problems. And it can help, well, it can hinder as well, depending on what side of the coin you're looking at it from, right? But this particular aircraft was input into a maintenance facility. Of course, there was an input meeting with the maintenance organization being there, the purchaser representative being there, and the seller's representative being there. And everybody agreed on what would be looked at, the depth of the inspection, and all of the details. And then the vendors, the sellers, our representative returned home while the aircraft was input for the inspection. So we didn't have an on-site representative. The buyer did have an on-site representative because, of course, they're not familiar with the aircraft. They want to pour through the books and have a good look at do a good physical inspection and have a good look at the aircraft, which they did. During their record review, they noticed that the aircraft had a lightning strike. And they did what all prudent people would do, and they went to the maintenance manual. Maintenance manual, of course, said if there's a lightning strike, that you must do an inspection on the aircraft for entry and exit points on the aircraft. So, of course, they did what any prudent buyer would do. They went to the maintenance manual. And the maintenance manual said that lightning strike inspection was supposed to be carried out, which it was, and it was documented in the technical records. That's what tipped this person off. But he thought that it should go a little further. He thought that actually the antennas, there might be exit points for the lightning, because lightning enters an aircraft one point and exits at another point or several points. So he thought that, you know what, the antennas on the aircraft should all be removed, because potentially if the antennas aren't bonded to the structure properly, then there could be arcing between the structure and the antennas. So, because he'd seen this before. So he actually asked the MRO to remove the antennas and check for arcing underneath the antennas. And they found some. And now all of a sudden, there were repairs that had to be done. Once you find damage on an aircraft, you have to look at what the criteria for that damage is and what the repairs are, right? So they found damage, they determined what the criteria was, and now repairs had to be effected. And they're not cheap repairs, and they're costly. So now all of a sudden, the buyer got into a discussion with us, the seller, asking if we are going to pay for the damage, the repair of the damage that was performed on the aircraft. Problem is, as I pointed out earlier on, pre-purchase inspections should be quite definitive, as this one was. And the buyer, the seller, and the MRO all knew this. And the removal of the antennas was not included in the pre-purchase inspection. Mm-hmm. And the buyer knew that, and the MRO knew that, and we didn't know that the antennas were being removed. So you have a couple issues with not having an on-site rep there with the aircraft. Work was being accomplished to our aircraft beyond the scope of what was agreed upon in the input. So it's typical, the buyer, they said, well, please go ahead and do this. We'll pick up the cost for the removal of the antennas.
Oh, okay.
Which it's not their place to do that.
No, because at that point, the aircraft was still belonged to your company.
Right. So that was our aircraft. We're the only ones that can actually authorize work to be accomplished on the aircraft beyond what's already been approved or authorized. So the MRO didn't contact us. They went ahead and carried out this work. They found damage. Now the buyer is saying, well, it's a damaged aircraft. We want either the damage repaired at your cost, the seller's cost, or they wanted concessions on the price. So right there, you're talking probably a couple $100,000 off the cost of the value of the aircraft. But then our company went to the MRO and said, well, we're not liable, you are. Mm-hmm. And the MRO said, well, the buyer authorized it. But again, the buyer wasn't authorized to authorize maintenance be performed on our aircraft. So in the end, what happened is it got real messy. The seller had a lawyer, the buyer had a lawyer, of course, the lawyer that they were using for the purchase of the aircraft, but now the MRO had their lawyer involved as well. And we're all trying to determine where this went wrong, who's liable for what, and who's going to pay for what. In the end, it wasn't our fault. When the lightning strike actually happened, the aircraft was inspected as per the type certificate holder's instructions. No damage was found. The instruction at that time didn't require that the antennas be removed. So everything was legitimate, and the aircraft was fine to continue in service until whenever the type certificate holder next required the antennas to be removed. The damage might have been found then and would have had been addressed, but that wasn't the case. So, but the buyer said, well, we don't want to buy an aircraft that has damage on it unless we get a discount on the price. And we weren't prepared to move on the price because it shouldn't have been, it was out of the scope of what they should have found to begin with. And if the buyer wanted a discount, well, now we're talking to the lawyers about, well, the MRO should be paying for the discount because they performed maintenance that they weren't authorized to do, and they uncovered a condition that the type certificate holder in all likelihood would have allowed to go until next major inspection. So it got real messy, and I know that concessions were made on everyone's part, and they finally came up with a solution. But this was a legal battle that nobody wants to get into. So my takeaways from it are a couple of things that, as I pointed out in the beginning, you want to make sure, all parties want to make sure of exactly what the pre-purchase inspection entails. That's not to say that the scope of pre-purchase can't change, but really it should have been agreed upon by the buyer and the seller, and then afterwards by the MRO if they're agreeable to actually performing the work prior to it being accomplished. And that should all be captured in writing as well. I mean, we're talking millions of dollars, and you want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Otherwise, it gets messy. And if you have a sale fall through, the owner isn't happy, and the buyer may be counting on the aircraft to put into service, and they're not prepared to put the aircraft in a maintenance input to have additional work that they hadn't counted on done, or the cost for that matter. So that's the important aspect. Then also, if you have somebody there on site from all parties, including the seller, like if our representative would have remained on site, this in all likelihood would have never happened, because I mean, as soon as a work order was raised to remove the antennas, the representative would have been able to put a stop to it right then. And it's not to say that the antennas maybe wouldn't have been removed, but it would have been agreed by all parties before they would have been removed.
Yeah, and in my opinion, another aspect is that by the maintenance organization doing that job, now there is the potential, like there was, to uncover something that needs to be fixed, and the maintenance organization may not be able to fix that problem. So now you have an aircraft that is stuck there with a repair that can be done, and now you have to contact maybe the authority and ask for a permit to fly to go somewhere else and have it fixed somewhere else. So again, a lot of
absolutely. So you bring up some good points, because I mean that's another important thing to take into account when you're putting together a pre-purchase, is where's it going to be done? Because if it's done at an OEM facility, then yeah, the likelihood of having to ferry it to somewhere else to have repairs accomplished, if need be, are a lot less likely. Because if it's an OEM facility, they probably have the engineering, the facilities, and everything, the tooling, whatever's required. But if you're doing it at a third-party facility and you find something like that, absolutely, it can ground the aircraft right then and there. And now you may have to work with the type certificate holder to come up with repair schemes, and you may have to work with maintenance organizations that can come in on site, which can potentially be another problem, because not all maintainers want another maintainer in their facility. So it can make real messes. So it's really worth thinking about all of those things beforehand.
Yeah, and your story made me think another two points. First of all, if there was really a problem with the antenna, wouldn't you I think there was supposed to be a possibility for the maintenance or the flight crew to actually see if there was a problem. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yes and no, because functionally, the systems that the antennas affect may still function perfectly fine, and that may be why the OEM or the type certificate holder says to perform this type of inspection. And part of that will also be the functionality of the affected equipment. So if you perform that inspection and the equipment functions fine, that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have some structural issues.
Yeah, and that drives me to the next point that I was going to make. So the buyer wanted for the antennas to be removed because he already experienced something similar where actually below the antenna there was some damage. So I wonder why the TC holder didn't have this kind of inspection directly in the maintenance manual.
Well,
and if not, is this a good reason to report actually
absolutely.
this problem to the TC holder?
So there's a couple aspects here. So firstly, the type certificate holder, when they're putting together instructions for continuum airworthiness, they have to take into account the effect that it might have, any damage might have on the airworthiness of the aircraft for a given period. So it might be until the next major inspection. It might be until a certain level of inspection that they consider the aircraft still airworthy if maintained in accordance with the schedules and everything else. And so they don't see a need for that. Now, the flip side of that is what you just mentioned. So anytime you run into something out of the ordinary, that should be reported as an occurrence or not necessarily as an occurrence, but it should be brought to the attention of the type certificate holder, because this is what they base their maintenance programs on.
Yeah.
So it might be that they need to adjust their schedule based on industry findings, right? So that does a couple of things. It tells you the importance of reporting these things to the TC holder. And I would argue that it probably would constitute an occurrence report to your local authority.
Mm-hmm.
And they in turn would forward that on to the OEM, to the type certificate holder. And then that way the loop is closed and everybody's aware of the potential issues.
Mm-hmm.
And in theory, the type certificate holder should be reporting back to the authority because of this issue that was found.
Yeah, okay. So how did the story end? At the end, I suppose the repair was done?
Yeah, in the end, the repair was done. The buyer bought the aircraft. As far as what concessions were made, those are legal aspects between the owner and seller that some of us just aren't made aware of.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, that's a very interesting story, and it's it points out how important it is to have somebody on site on different aspects. You know, sometimes we have clients approaching us with some sort of pre-purchase inspections where you have to go. They want you to go on an airport, and it's raining. There is a hurricane, and then you have to look at the aircraft and report back to them. For them to have an idea the status of the aircraft. Well, it's really not a good condition to do something like that. This is what I call pre-purchase inspections, right, because normally they just want to have a look, but even then it's important to have the time and the good conditions to actually have a look at the aircraft.
I think there's some value to that too, though. I've been sent out on pre-purchase inspections where I perform my own pre-purchase inspection, and it was basically a walk around, and I called the buyer up and I said, no, you don't want to touch this one. And that's in a lot of cases, that's all they're looking for. Right? But it's just a cursory to tell whether you actually want to move on or not. But interestingly, also, like you say, we have clients that approach us, and we've seen people buy aircraft without a pre-purchase inspection. So, but like I mentioned earlier, we can do a whole podcast on pre-purchase inspections. And, you know, I think we've seen enough of things that went wrong, things that went right, gotchas. I mean, involving the regulatory authorities, a lot of people don't think about that, you know, before you even buy the aircraft. So there's a lot of things to consider. Yeah,
and also it is a very important part, because at some point, if you actually ended up buying the aircraft, that aircraft will have to be, in some cases, exported and imported in another authority. So you want to make sure with the pre-purchase inspection that it's not only physical but also technical records, that you actually look very well at the aircraft as an entirety.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so that was a really good story. Thank you for sharing the story with us, and we look forward to next month to the next story, experience, adventure.
Right. I'm looking forward to it as well.
Thank you so much for watching, and bye for now.